Now, I've been making videos about Project Zomboid since April of 2021, and much of that time has been focused around covering the development of the game itself. So when I was asked by the relatively new design director at the Indie Stone if I'd like to hold an interview with them, well, I couldn't really say no. What you're about to see is that interview with questions focused around the current state of Build 42 itself, what we as players can expect in the future, and a dive into some fairly controversial changes that we've seen recently. Hopefully this will serve to give you an insight into what goes on behind the scenes at Project Zomboid. So, Serellan, thank you very much for joining me today. To kick things off, can we get a brief introduction from you and your role at the Indie Stone?
Yeah. So my name's Christian Allen, and I'm the relatively new now design director at the Indie Stone, focused on Project Zomboid. Quick introduction on me is I live in Washington in the United States. My background is I'm originally Alaskan. Grew up in Alaska, in the military for a bit, and then in the early 2000s, got into video games. So I've been working in the games industry for way too long now, and a lot of exciting things that I worked on in the background. But last year, was talking to the Indie Stone team, and the opportunity came up to join. So long story short, here I am.
Fabulous. So that's actually leads me quite nicely into my next question. Before you found yourself where you are now at the Indie Stone, what kind of experience did you actually have in the games industry, and how exactly did you end up working on Project Zomboid?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a fascinating story. I joke that my interview at the Indie Stone was the longest job interview I've ever had. My background in the games industry is long and varied. I started as a modder for Rainbow Six. That's kind of how I got into the games industry. I was making mods for Rainbow Six for my LAN group back home, and put those up on the internet. And decided I wanted to, well, I always have made games, but decided I could actually do games as a job, mainly by my wife telling me I either needed to quit modding all the time or get a job doing it. And okay, let's do that. So I started at Red Storm Entertainment, working on... Originally got hired to do Rainbow Six, but much like the games industry, immediately got moved from Rainbow Six PC to Ghost Recon console. So my initial game development was primarily focused on the Xbox. Worked my way up pretty quickly from assistant designer, lead designer, creative director on the Ghost Recon franchise. From there, when I moved out to Washington, came out to Bungie, worked on Halo Reach for a couple of years. Spent some time at Warner Brothers Games, I worked on Lord of the Rings, Mad Max, some DC stuff. From there, I actually spun up my own indie studio. I did the thing that all AAA game developers try to do at some point, and go independent and start your own studio. Did that for about 6 years. We shipped a few different games, Takedown, Epsilon. I even did a weird VR super indie experimental title called Hotel Blind. And that's when I had transitioned over to Unreal Engine, because obviously Ghost Recon and Halo back then were both proprietary engines. When I went independent, started with Unreal 3 and then Unreal 4. And my tinkering and prototyping and making videos caught Epic's eye, and they brought me on to be an Unreal Engine evangelist. So it was working more on the developer side, focusing on indie game developers. So I essentially got paid by Epic for 6 years to talk to indie game developers all day long, give them technical advice, look at their blueprints, and I did a bunch of other stuff. I did touch Fortnite a little bit, did a bunch of stuff on Unreal Engine, but my primary focus was in that indie game space. And alongside all of that, way back in, I guess it was 2011, 2012, I bought this little game called Project Zomboid, and I've always been a zombie fan. I'm really into strategic and tactical and realistic games. I love RPGs. Played it on and off. I had actually reached out to the Indie Stone way back when, before I started my own company, going, hey, I love your game. I love what you're doing. I was really impressed that They really pioneered, kind of a business model of, having a game in active development. We kept in touch at a game developers conference. I think it was like in 2015. We met up and chatted. And after I left Epic, I got caught in the great layoffs of 2023, and I was doing a bunch of consulting for game design consulting and biz dev consulting for a bunch of different companies. The Indie Stone asked me to look at a couple different features. I wrote some designs for them, and that just kind of kept snowballing over the course of 2025 to where eventually I went out to Brighton, I met with the team, and this role became a reality. And along the way, I made some mods too. So it's a Cinderella story. It's been interviewing for this job since 2011 and finally landed it. I had to go make some AAA games and, work with Hollywood to finally nail a gig, but I got it.
So I have a quick question. You mentioned in there that you started the game in 2011. Am I correct in saying that would have been the Desura days? Or was that? Yeah, it was. So you've got much more experience in Project Zomboid than me. I think I picked it up in 2013 when it released on Steam. It's really nice to hear about your history with the game. You actually knew the game a long time before you got involved with the development of it, which I think is so crucial for a role like design director. And I have to squeeze in there as well, Halo Reach, one of my all-time favorite games, one of my all-time favorites. So thank you for your work on that as well. So I don't think that I'm alone in noticing that updates are much more frequent now. I think we're at a point now where we're seeing about an update every month, at least for the last few months. What can you tell us about what's going on behind the scenes right now with the team? And have there been any big changes with the team's work process or structure since you've joined as design director?
Definitely, you've seen the change in, trying to put out a little more communication, trying to put out a little more direction as far as, why decisions are made and why features are updated. The development process in the Indie Stone and for Project Zomboid specifically is different than obviously a lot of other places in the games industry and has both its unique rewards and its unique challenges. And one of those is that a lot of times features, as they're being developed, they get implemented in stages, right? One thing has to come online to support another thing, And in more traditional release schedules, even, something like Fortnite that has chapters that are, kind of self-contained modules that come out in a lot of places, or in, more traditional old school AAA development where you have the main game and it launches and then it's done and you can never touch it. And maybe you can do DLC packs or expansion pack or something. A lot of times, if they're ready to go, they need to be included in a release because it's a core fundamental change, kind of under the hood, and you can't just put this off in a little corner if you're changing something that affects lots of different systems. But then you might not have the entire chunk of content come out all at the same time. So someone might see a change, like, for example, ammunition changes. If you remember, there was an update a few times ago where it was like, hey, we combined 223 and 556 and changed a bunch of the underlying ammunition systems. Well, obviously, I'd already designed the weapons that were going to go along with that, but those two things couldn't go out together. You had to make the core underlying change first, test it, have it in, and then you've got to release right in there for other features that support it. You can't just rip it out. So it needs to go out, it needs to be integrated, and then the weapons come out. Now, I would say there's sometimes a hesitancy. You don't want to necessarily go, hey, we're changing all, there's a bunch of new weapons that are going to come out, in 2 months. Because you don't necessarily know, which one of those are going to work, which one of those are going to be fun. We haven't implemented it yet. So there's a challenge on that front. I put out a blog post, I think, in February, and I recognize that looking at the feedback, a lot of times, people can have update fatigue and people can be like, well, when are things coming? And it feels like there's just endless churn. So trying to provide a little bit more communication, a little bit more heads up with how things are rolling out, without the challenge. The other thing is, over promising and under delivering.
And that's the bonus of having an unstable branch, is that you can do things like that, I suppose.
I was just going to say that's really unique, and one of the big strengths that Project Zomboid has is you can look back into B41 and go, okay, well, looking across how this feature and how people interact with it over a super long period of time, how it's kind of turned out, how it affected long-term play, especially with a game as complicated and in-depth as Zomboid. How does that affect 6 months of in-game play, a year of in-game play? How is it affecting new players as this coming in? And then you can see as those changes roll out into unstable, okay, well, what's people's initial reaction? What do they feel when they see it, i.e., big Reddit threads or Steam or initial creator responses? And then how do people actually play with it? How does it actually affect gameplay? Because a lot of times how it makes you feel versus how you actually react to it as a player are two different things. And then gauging those things and be able to tweak and move those dials. I understand it can be frustrating for players in unstable. I've been in other projects or as a player in other projects that are kind of in that mainly in like open source development, where you're like, wait, why is this like this now? This is different. I don't understand. But in general, I think it can lead to a more coherent, backed up experience for the player, which I think the Indie Stone has demonstrated over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, again, going back to the beauty of having an unstable branch, is that if the players have a reaction to something and it's particularly negative, you can change that. You can take it back. You can take it under the hood, as you said, and make some changes to it. And it's interesting what you said as well about how the initial reaction can be, and the feelings associated to that can often be different to how players respond to it. And especially, I think, over time, that can change, particularly because as players start to adapt to this new thing, if we take Muscle Strain as like a big example of that, when Muscle Strain came into the game, I remember a particularly vocal response on the negative side from a large part of the community. And now I feel like now that it's been adjusted and tweaked a bit and it's more in like a more forgiving place, I think people see the purpose of Muscle Strain, at least the majority, and are happy to play with it enabled rather than just outright disabling it. So it's interesting to see how opinions change or how players adapt to certain features over time.
Yeah, and it's also in Project Zomboid's case, the fact that, like you mentioned, there are sandbox options and there are options that you can adjust yourself, is actually seeing what are those things that people affect. How do they change things on their multiplayer servers, on their private runs? What mods are people enabling? All of that long-term behavior can be used to inform design decisions in a way that a traditional AAA game studio. I mean, on Halo Reach, we paid hundreds of people to go bang on this feature, and you would have them do reports. You would watch them. If you ever look at any of the stuff that Jamie Gressimer, the game designer, really pioneered a lot of gameplay, UX testing standards, those folks aren't necessarily still your player base. And, what you feel and what you say and what you do, oftentimes there's differences in those things.
We mentioned design decisions in there, and I would imagine that you have more than a few thoughts on where you'd like Project Zomboid to go next. What can players expect both over the next few months and longer term over the next couple of years?
So that's a great question that I won't be able to fully answer. In the short term, you can probably tell what I've been focused on, a lot of UI and UX friction that was there, and there still is UI and UX friction, but trying to consolidate interactions to make things a little more consistent with how they flow, hit pain points, hit balance issues, hit things like default, the game mode revamp with things like occupation changes to support changes and gameplay that's been introduced in B42. That's really what I've been focused in on the short term. Everything is a collaborative effort at the Indie Stone. This isn't me sitting in an ivory tower going, change this and do this. And there's no such thing as a idea person that just sits around and, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we did this? There's libraries and libraries and libraries of that just from the team of years and years and years of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? There's no shortage of cool ideas. I'm not going to come up with something that this team hasn't already thought of before. So yeah, without getting into a lot of specifics of like, this is what we're going to do in 2 years and it's going to be amazing. We're going to be following the general roadmap that's been set forward by the team for years.
Okay, fabulous. And I apologize. I am going to have to ask, do you have any sneak peeks that you or the team are willing to share with the community today on this interview?
Well, let's see. In the short term, there definitely is some more changes coming to occupations and traits. Those are going to be rolled out relatively soon. It was interesting reactions to the last update to a couple traits. Be interesting to talk about why those changes are made. But one key little thing is Smoker might get a little bit of a buff, both from a trait perspective and a loot perspective. There's some other features that I'd love to talk about, but I'm literally like hours away from getting 100% confirmation.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Hey, I'm sure like if you wanted to, I'm sure we can pop that down in the comments when the video comes out. And I can tell that you want to tell us more. And that means more often than actually giving us the features. On a similar note, I feel like I'm already going to know the answer to this one, but I feel like I have to ask just for the sake of everybody watching, just to say that I've tried. Can you tell us anything about when Build 42 will be fully released on the stable branch of Project Zomboid?
So stable is planned to release exactly when it's ready to go stable.
Fantastic answer. Very much what I expected.
Yeah, that's about as far as I can go. That is absolutely the deciding factor. There's still features to tweak. There's still tons of bugs to fix. There's still a pathway ahead of us, but that window is getting narrower. And I think you've noticed that probably through the updates. I mean,
yeah, I think it's fair to say that we've seen a lot more focus on rather balancing and fixes than the implementation of new features over the last couple of months, which is perhaps longer as well, which is, a good sign, I think, that, like you say, you're narrowing down that gap. On a similar note, how do you feel about Build 42 and the community response so far? Do you feel it's been well received, or are there things that the team would still like to change?
That is a great question. And hitting the last point first, there are a million things that the team would like to change. Everything that I look at, the community, how they've responded to things, and I, look at that in a variety of different ways. And then we've got the team in a lot of different opinions and feelings and diversity on the team from, all around the world to the style of games that they play. And so everybody's going to have a different opinion, especially with something like Project Zomboid. Oh my gosh, you changed Apocalypse. That's amazing. Oh my gosh, you changed Apocalypse. I hate you forever. Why did you do this? The reaction, I think, has been critical in general by the community to B42, yet constructive. And that is the key to sorting out, to kind of digging into stuff. It can be really hard to, set aside constructive feedback and valid complaints and just and knee-jerk reactions. If we look at something like the map changes with Echo, this change, it makes sense. It supports some other things. There's very strong logical reasons to do it. But one, it makes people feel like something's been taken away, even if that was not the intention. And two, it breaks everybody's saves, which sucks and we don't want to do. But there's also this other save breaking issue. So if we compare these up together, it's going to at least localize the pain and instead of spreading it out. So yeah, that's the right decision to make. Now, of course, then you have to go through the pain points of, yes, your run was destroyed, your character was destroyed. That sucks. But it's leading to a stronger game, that stable release, which is the majority of the players. The majority of folks are going to be, hey, there's, cool. I've been playing B41 for all this time, and now there's a new update, and it's called B42. What's this look like? And thinking about their experience as well, and while also appreciating the folks that, signed up for the ride that is unstable and seeing things change and fluctuate and break sometimes, which is never fun for anybody.
I think, to be fair, there's and perhaps I'm allowed to say this, and perhaps you wouldn't want to, then that's more than fair. But perhaps a bit of a hot take: things like save breaks have to be expected. If you're opting into an unstable branch of a game, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, it's unstable at times, and it's going to happen. However, I like that you've acknowledged that the team don't like doing that and try to pair up a couple of issues at the same time, so that perhaps that's less common. And I think also there's the perception of, okay, that yes, this is happening a little bit more often now, but we're also seeing updates every month. So it's going to happen a bit more often because we're seeing more updates.
Yeah, and it's a perpetual challenge, right? It's, on one hand, I haven't gotten any updates. What's changing? I want to have the capability to give feedback on these new features. Okay, well, let's put it out faster. Oh, my game's breaking all the time, or this is changing. I just logged in and now traits are different. And, last week they weren't, and it's changing all the time. I want it to be like this. And both of those things are in conflict. Everybody's human, gamer, developers and players and everybody, I, as a user or a player, I just want everything, done and awesome right now in every game that I play and in every application that I use. That's obviously what we want. For example, a trait adjustment, theoretically, from a development standpoint, that's just changing a number, right? So you change a number and you have to smoke test it and make sure, you didn't accidentally change it to a negative number, or, it didn't break anything. Once that's in, it's a relatively safe change. So, from a traditional game development standpoint, you wouldn't ever, release, that kind of thing as like a test of let's change this and understand how people adjust to it. You would just say, well, I'm a game designer and, I looked at all the data and this is this is how we're going to do it. We're going to change it and it's going to sit. And then right at the end, after you play tested it a lot and you really, feel comfortable with it, then you release it. Unstable is unstable, and things are going to break, things are going to change. I know, for example, right now, we looked at controllers. You couldn't use firearms and controllers. Okay, let's adjust based on that. Well, that's not working, for these players. Let's adjust that. Let's tweak that. We could have tried to put that over in a box and really, do it perfect and then release it. But then we wouldn't have all that feedback, because it's not like you have a lot of isometric survival hardcore games to go out and be like, what's the best controller implementation out of these 50 games like you can do with a shooter?
It's certainly within its own niche, isn't it, Project Zomboid?
Yeah.
There's not many other similar games to it. And just to sort of summarize what we've been talking about there, so the response has been critical but constructive, and it's fair to say that it's been useful for you guys when making some changes through the unstable branch. I would also just like to take the opportunity to say to any of the viewers watching this as well, if you feel you have any feedback on the current build or the version of the game that you're currently playing, please feel free to put it down in the comments. Let the team know what you've enjoyed, what you haven't enjoyed, and why, most importantly, because I can tell you for sure that I'm sure Christian and other members of the team will be reading through some of the comments to this one in particular. I do just want to go back to one thing that we talked about in the midst of that question there, which was the fairly controversial removal of Echo Creek as a spawn location. So what prompted that decision from the team? What was the thinking behind that, if I may ask?
Well, that's a great question. And so the few different elements went into that discussion. So one thing, there's some underlying features, like I talked about before. There is some underlying features that I'm hoping are very going to be out soon that Echo Creek didn't support from a core element. Echo Creek, in the way it was designed, was really designed and built and intended as a test bed. If you look at Echo Creek from a feature standpoint, basements, animals, crafting, workstations, every single new feature that was as a high level feature for B42, it's not a coincidence that all of those things are showcased in Echo Creek. It was intended as a test bed for those things. It would not have been a good player experience to be like, hey, if you really want to experience animal husbandry, jump into Muldraw because it's a really great place to collect up some cows and build a farm and experience those features. From a player experience standpoint, however, I did suffer from a few limitations. One, a newer player, because of the way it was designed and the way it was built, you are strongly encouraged not to leave the area, right? You have this magical building that's a gas station and has a cool basement that spawns tons of crafting and building materials. You have farms all over your place. You have a river right there. And then if you don't get a good vehicle spawn, guess what you get to do? You get to go on a very, very long walk through very, very scary trees. Yep. And if you go north and hit Guns Emporium, you are going to have a very, very bad day as a new player. Yep. So difficulty ramp for midterm was not great. So a lot of factors went into that point. Again, there's going to be some new stuff rolling out soon that couldn't go out along with that update that I think people are going to be very excited about. It's not 100%, so I gotta follow the rules of not saying exactly what it is, but it will provide more options to players in general, especially the more hardcore players. One of the mods that I made that helped get me this job was called Choose Your Spawn, where you can spawn anywhere in the map. So I understand both the desire to have different options and support the lore, the storytelling. Again, I have to think about both the long-term players experience, the midterm players experience, and the brand new players experience that's coming in. And if you put someone in a situation right away where it's like, hey, this is the easy place to spawn, cool, great. I read everywhere that this is the easy place where I should start. And now I'm having a negative experience 20 hours in because I followed that advice and that was the option or that was the default, then that's not a great experience for them. So a lot of factors went into it. And again, the save breaking part of it was not great. We have those other tile set issues that likely would have caused that at the same time for a good chunk of folks as well.
Yeah, it's par for the course, right? When it comes to unstable, unfortunately, that's going to happen from time to time. But that leads me on to my follow-up question about Echo Creek. So having heard the community feedback on this and clearly being aware of how it's being talked about, are there any plans at this time to reverse the change, or are you waiting for those features that we're talking about here to come out before anything like that gets decided?
Yeah, so the latter is going to be the quote unquote official answer. There's additional features coming online. So no, the straight up answer as far as reversing the change, no. That's not currently in the plan.
Okay, so the Extinction mode has been in player hands for a little while now. I have played more than one playthrough on that so far. How do you feel about the community response to this new way to play?
It's been exhilarating and fascinating. And scary. When we sat down and looked at game modes as a core object, a core feature set, and what did we want to address, and it was identified as what really ended up in as being game modes. It was what is real, what is actually what is the core intended experience of Project Zomboid, and that didn't necessarily exist, at least as players experienced it, right? People didn't, some people would think, oh, well, Survivor is where you should start, and Apocalypse is the default. No, it's this, it's that, and Builder was there for the more building style players, but the core settings didn't necessarily support that really well. So the two additional things that we talked about was a lot of the really experienced players. What do? They start amping up the difficulty. They start, jacking up those numbers. And that's what they tend to do to give themselves more challenge. And so just really diving into providing a game mode experience, like this is, designed and intended to be like that for experienced players. New players, please don't start like this. It's going to be, well, you can, if you really want to dive in, and then just really sitting with the sandbox settings. It's exhilarating as a game designer to have those options available to you, because a lot of times as a game developer, when you don't have those kinds of things exposed as just levers to pull, and you're having to be more like, well, let's change this math and change these core things, and you're really fundamentally changing the core of the game in every lever that you pull. You have to be much more conservative. Where something like Extinction, it can be like, yes, this is going to kill you. This is going to be chaotic and exciting, and you are going to have to work really hard for this, and it is going to feel like an accomplishment.
Yeah, I think Extinction for me personally, and this is my own opinion coming into this, like I felt as someone with just shy of 2,000 hours in the game and that has played it for years now, it still felt like a new experience, which was something that I don't get very often with Project Zomboid anymore. So to be able to jump into Extinction and genuinely think like, oh, okay, this is new, this is going to be a real challenge, was very interesting indeed for me, because we can try mods and mods do change the game in a lot of ways, but to get this like official game mode change was a real sort of treat for me personally. And although there are perhaps tweaks that could be made, I think generally speaking, I was very, very pleased when Extinction came around. So just to follow up on this question that I had, are we likely to see adjustments to the Extinction mode over the next few updates?
Yeah, there definitely are some changes coming. I'd say they're relatively minor, as opposed to the last pass with, for example, day sprinters. And so that was a relatively big knob to pull. And like you identified, it was kind of, I think you mentioned it like in one of your very early streams, like this feels like it should be day sprinters. And I was like sitting there going like,
it was something I changed straight away. It was, in fact, I never actually played Extinction with that original speed setting. I watched somebody else play it and immediately said like, okay, that seems like an oversight. I'm going to change that so that there's sprinters during both the day and night, and immediately got that like, first house I was in, alarm went off, sprinters were everywhere. It just felt straight away like, oh, okay, this is something new and exciting, and like it's really challenging straight out the gate.
It's funny because it really was kind of an oversight, because when I went through those options, I didn't know that specific one would block the sprinters. Because of the way the systems interact, if it only applies the random sprinter percentage if random is enabled. So by disabling random during the day, also zeroed out the sprinters. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, that's not quite where it needed to be.
I'm going to go to something else now, which is, we've touched on it briefly. Recently, we saw some pretty substantial changes to occupations and traits. Is the team now happy with where everything is in this department, or can we expect some further balancing tweaks?
There's a few more things coming. As I mentioned before, there will be some more tweaks to both occupations and traits. The last update, 4216, was the big pass, right? Like we want to hit these high level goals of making occupations feel more like occupations and having them be more impactful and not just, I have a carpentry background, I want to feel like a carpenter. So that was the big pass. Same with traits. It's interesting because I've seen a lot of the speculation, right? There's, the motivations behind changes of, this was changed because too many people use it, or it's too good, or whatever. Really, the motivation behind that was looking at the changes that have been rolled out in B42 with things like darkness, the new lighting system, the massive impact that the lighting changes from a gameplay perspective have had on the game, and as well as things like sleep. Pillows are now a thing. those are a big benefit to sleeping. When you stack those together, you end up with characters that can essentially rock and roll all day long on 3 hours of sleep. That's very powerful. That's really strong. That's good. Cool, you like it. That's more powerful than, here's one change that's going to come that I'll slip off. Nutritionist is 4 points. That's really expensive to give you information about calorific, inputs. So I'm going to pull that down.
Okay.
I sneaked out a feature.
That's a sneak peek. We'll take that one.
Yeah. So there will be a few more tweaks like that. The next pass that you're going to see is mainly in a few occupations that were too expensive. There's going to be at least one trait that gets cheaper on the positive side and at least one trait that gives you a little bump on the negative side. Chef, for some reason, at a certain point along the way, got changed to short blunt instead of short blade. I think I used the wrong letter code in there, and blunt and blade snuck through the testing process. Wait, does that say blunt? That's supposed to say blade.
I did wonder about that one. There were a couple of creators that shared that one with me and were like, was this meant to be like short bladed? I was like, I don't know, like this seems, but okay, brilliant. That's a really interesting sort of insight into what's going to happen going forward. A question about crafting now. The community has been quite vocal, myself included, about their struggles with the current crafting interface. Is this something that the team has heard? And if so, are there any plans towards improvements?
Well, I would say absolutely it has been heard. UI and UX was one of my really big early focuses to try to identify where we could clean up pain points in the short term. There have been a lot of core changes and improvements, although they tend to sometimes get lost in the wash with like how recipes are searched for, right? Like how the returns items instead of string names, like things like that like do improve the process. I do want to acknowledge that UI interaction across the board, when you look at features across the board, there's a lot of things that you as an experienced player, because I'm guessing that most of the folks that are watching this are they're relatively hardcore PC players. Like, how the vehicle menu works and how you interact with it, and you understand like, oh, right, I can right click on a tire, the little tire name, and that pops up the menu, and that's how I change a tire, and that's how it works. That is completely inconsistent in multiple different places across the interface. How you interface with a TV is different than how you interface with a car. That is more of a long-term project to bring consistency across the board in all of those various features. So, the short, honest answer is you're not going to see in the short term big fundamental changes to the way those interfaces work. There's continuing polish that'll come in, and I can't specify how exactly those are going to roll out. You should not expect in a month that you're going to open up and crafting is going to have a completely different interface and work in a completely different way. That's going to be more of a long-term project.
100%. I think that's a really good answer. I know you were a big advocate for the re-implementation of certain right-click options. Was this due to players struggling with the new crafting systems?
Well, it was integrated. It was all game design systems touch each other, right? As B42 expanded its feature set, the core interaction element of previous iterations of Project Zomboid were built around right-click. If you right-clicked on a battery charger, it worked one way. If you had all the potential materials to build things and you right-clicked on a tile, you would see what you could build in that tile. Well, that worked when you could use carpentry to build 8 different things or 10 different things, and you could use welding to build 6 different things. But as soon as you can build 30 different things or craft 30 different things, that starts to break down. You get massive lists and massive stuff that's really hard. When they were putting in those interactions, different interpretation on build or interact or read or, turn on or turn off, all these different terminologies for things. So, and there was kind of a shift to look at trying out different systems, like if you look at how, say, example, fireplaces, tagging onto the actual loot window object, interaction buttons there, that's cool, and that's cool as an option. But then when it was like, cool, you can interact with that over here. Well, let's pull that out of right mouse click button. Now players don't understand how to interact with it. They can't find it. They don't understand where it is. They're confused, and confused players are unhappy players. So is there a way in the short term that we can kind of bring this more into a consistent system that through interacting with it, you as a player can look and go, oh, okay, I see a window-shaped thing in the world. I right-click on it. There's now a window-shaped icon with a name, and here's how I can contextually interact with that window. Okay, cool. Now, inventory, which works in a completely different way than tiles, I want to right-click on that and interact with things in a certain way. Okay, well, then how's that bleed over into crafting? And that's where kind of the integration of contextual crafting made its way back into that right mouse click menu, but in a more consistent fashion that felt like they all kind of work together. The other thing that change allowed us to do was, if you notice, trying to prioritize items that you need to do under stress. Removing broken glass from a window is way high up. Removing curtains is farther down, because generally you're not going to be like, oh, I got 5 zombies in the thing, let's take curtains off the windows. You're like, I need to get the glass out so I can climb through really fast. Like, that's what I want to do. And so, that's what drove a lot of that. Same with barricading. A lot of times you're barricading under stress. You want to be able to do it quickly. You're not building stairs under stress. Like, you're generally not like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of zombies coming, I need to build a set of stairs to get on the roof. You just run away. So.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a very big thing for me, was having gotten used to all these systems over such a big amount of time, was like going to barricade a window in the way that I knew, which was to right click, and then being so surprised when it was under like a carpentry menu in the building menu. So I'm glad that you touched on that, and I think it's a very positive change that we're seeing these things coming back to the right click menu.
Yeah, and that's a good example of, looking at consistent feedback over the course of, when that change was made. I should be clear, this is not like a, idea that Christian came up with of like, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. Literally I came on, it was like, go work on the right mouse click menu, like make it better. That was like day one, direction. And spent a lot of time, with RJ and the different team members, like working through, okay, well, how's that going to work with this tile, and how can we make it better? So it wasn't just like, to be very clear, it wasn't like, hey, I had this cool idea, maybe we can put barricade on back on right mouse click menu. That'd be neat.
So moving away from the crafting now, I do just want to ask more of like more of a trivial question. With zero expectation, if you could implement a single feature for Project Zomboid, what would it be and why?
Oh, that is a great question. And I'll use that to cover as I formulate my response. What always impressed me both as a player and a designer is the depth of the systems in Project Zomboid and the emergent gameplay that comes out of that. So one of the things that I'm really excited to look at, besides high level, big high level things like NPCs, looking at how that's going to roll out very long term, but more like longer term depth in things like medical systems. I would love to explore diabetics in the apocalypse. I would love to have that moment of, I'm in multiplayer and my teammate got sepsis because they didn't take care of their wounds. They didn't clean their wounds. They got zombie blood in it. It led to a bigger infection. They have sepsis. Hey, we need to go hit the hospital to get the really good antibiotics, not the stuff that we're going to find at the pharmacy. We need to go on a run to save our teammate. Like those kinds of long-term systems for example, just sticking with that example of not like, oh, I have an infection, and so, you know, I might take damage and I might die in the next thing, so I got to pour alcohol in it. It's like, it's more of like, well, if I clean my wounds early on, I won't get an infection. If I do get an infection, you know, there's antibiotics. If it grows to this, it hits this, and how that drives players. You know, thinking about like gas spoilage, things like that. To me, that's really, really cool. And exploring that kind of that long-term meta. You know, one of the visions that, you know, were set forth is that long-term experience of rebuilding civilization, of being able to cross over that hump from the extinction into, you know, the rising. Exploring those things is really, really exciting for me in a way that supports still that immediate, you know, Dawn of the Dead type experience.
I just want to say, Christian, thank you very much for taking the time today for the interview. Are there any final messages that you want to convey to the Project Zomboid community before we finish this up?
Well, I think the main thing that I just want you to take away is that this is how you died. And sorry, that's what's going to happen. It's all for naught, but keep trying. You can make it someday.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Christian. So that was my interview with Christian Allen, design director of Project Zomboid. Hopefully you found this insightful as to what's going on behind the scenes. But if there's anything you'd like to know that I didn't ask about in this interview, once again, please feel free to ask down in the comments. Huge thank you, as always, to my Patreon supporters for backing the channel. And if you want to join them, there is a link down in the description of this video. Thanks, folks, and I will see you all in the next one.